Recording now. All right, welcome everybody to this conversation about rubrics, utilizing rubrics as an assessment tool. And I'm going to ask you to do something which in person, it would be a kind of like a fist to five for those of you who see the camera. Fist would mean I have no idea what this is. It sounds, pick your foreign language, whatever that might be for you. It could be Chinese, it could be Swahili, it could be whatever. Or it could be five where you know this very well and you probably could take over the conversation and lead the webinar for the balance. And of course, there's a range in between. So with five being five and fist, let's call it 0, where would you rank yourself right now in terms of your ability to describe what a rubric is and what it's used for, as well as how to use one? So basically trying to get a sense of your expertise and comfort level coming into the conversation. And the more honest you are, the better. So please feel free to share what is your reality at this time. Okay, so we've got a range. The highest number should be 5. So anybody who's putting something in higher than 5, you might want to readjust your number. I'm not exactly sure if that was a typo, Denise, or if you meant that as, let's say, 4, and you were thinking on a 1 to 10 scale. So you put 8. I'm not sure. Okay, either way, we are going to move on, and I will continue to monitor your responses. Let's talk briefly about who I am. Actually, you're all returnees pretty much, so I don't think I need to spend any time here. So I will move directly into the next slide. And finally, by the way, for those of you in New York, New Jersey, we're having a nice day today. So maybe that part-time gardener will see some light of day a little bit later on with the sun out. All right, a couple of quick announcements. Most of you are already here. Richard and others who are still responding to all panelists, kindly change it to all panelists and attendees. Okay, that is number 1. And number 2, for those of you who are interested in receiving a certificate and do not yet know where to look for one, please be sure to go to my website, impactfulcoaching.com, and check out the toolkit. And in the toolkit, you will be able to access all of a bunch of resources, but at the bottom there, I specifically included a certificate or a link to a certificate. All right, I'm just pulling up some links over here, including the toolkit. One, I'm going to be feeding that into the chat as we move forward, and this way we are sure to be, what's the word I'm looking for? This way, let's see actually if I have the ability to make this go live. All right, I clicked on something. We'll see if that actually works. I haven't tried this before, so a little bit of experimentation. I hope you will bear with me for a moment as we do this. Okay, so it looks like we may have the capacity to go live even with this, which would be kind of neat. In the meantime, let's move on because that's why we're here. And I saw your range of responses, which means that there's a lot of different knowledge bases, if you will, in this call. And I will do my best to ensure that everybody who showed up today is going to get something meaningful from our conversation. So again, I apologize. My computer's actually been a little bit on the slow side. So I don't know if everything is just coming through just slow on my end, if there's another reason for it. I do hope that you'll be able to see everything and that the responsiveness is timely on my end. So I know I'm kind of like a little bit distracted here, just trying to get everything up and running, but it looks like we are actually going live. So I hope you all put on your Sunday outfit and you're ready to join me. I don't think anybody will see anything other than me, but nonetheless. And for some reason, my computer still has not loaded those links. As soon as I get them up and running, I will, there we go. I'm going to populate it into the chat here. Okay, so here is the link for the certificate. All right, just in general, I'm going to be sharing links all throughout the session, so get used to it. All righty, without further ado, let's jump into our conversation here about, hang on one second, let's get back there. All right, so I'm hopeful that you can see what I see, which is the PowerPoint in the center and me on the right side, or at least on some side, wherever your camera is. If anyone does not see one or both of those, please let me know in the chat, and we'll try to make this work. All right, now I have been asking for a a little bit now about this, so forgive me for asking again, but I think that this is important and I'd love to get your feedback. Some people have already responded. It's been very helpful and very insightful for me. And if you don't mind doing the same, I'm going to link this up now or share it in the chat. I will plan to share it again later, but if you can open up the link that is relevant to you. So if you are a principal, please open that one, a school leader. If you are a teacher, want to become a master teacher, or you already are, but you want to just be part of a community of master teachers, I am in the process of formulating a mastermind group for each of those groups because I feel I personally have been part of masterminds. I think that the power of masterminds are incredible. They're great for growing your business, but they're also great for growing your professional practice, to be together with like-minded professionals who are interested in the same things that you are interested in and want to grow together. Just out of curiosity, if anybody has been part of a mastermind, could you either raise your hand or thumb or reply yes in the chat? And if you haven't, you can feel free to reply no. But I will tell you that when I share this information via email about the actual live web pages, you'll be able to find out more information. I think you'll find it to be minimally intriguing, if not outright interesting, and certainly something that I would encourage you, especially now when there's so much uncertainty. We don't know what the landscape of education will be looking like moving forward. And I believe very strongly that now is the most appropriate time, if ever, to be coming together with like-minded professionals who will take the journey together, grow with one another, and be there to support each other as we figure out next steps in our professional journey. So I'm not seeing any responses right now in the chat. I don't know if that means anything in terms of what I asked you, but if you can, please do reply yes or no to the question whether you've been part of a mastermind before. Now, I hope you don't mind that I get off on a bit of a tangent for a moment, because I found this to be extremely powerful. And if you don't mind, I would like to be able to share this with you. Oh, I can do this still. I'm going to share the computer sound. I'd love for you to see this, and I'd love for you to be able to kind of like get some inspiration as I got inspiration. And then we'll continue with our regularly scheduled subject. So please do indulge me for about 3 minutes. Get a little inspiration so that we can move forward doing our very best work. Please confirm that you can hear this when it starts to play.
The headlines say that school has been canceled. They're shut down until this crisis has been dismantled. Social distance measures have been dropped like an anvil. And since you can't guarantee every kid has a laptop, paper, and pencil, classrooms are empty, parents are extra busy, and our students are going crazy because school has been canceled. Well, except for the one where that teacher dresses up and reads books to his third graders. Well, and those that are sending personalized letters to their students in weekly mailers. And the ones making signs and celebrating high school seniors, making sure that they can finish their education and don't feel like failures. Well, and then there's those schools that are providing food for every kid in their area. Teachers and administrators bringing stability in all of this hysteria. Like holding Zoom meetings and greeting every kid by name before they share. Whose primary mission right now is to make sure every kid knows that they care. Who realize that this type of school isn't the same that it was before. It's not defined by learning content and getting a high score, but the motivation is creativity and finding new ways to engage students more, like hands-on activities and encouraging them to get outside more. It's still caring for students who no longer walk through the door, like the teachers who are delivering students work from the trunk of their cars and are making time for virtual parent meetings from afar. Or how about the music teachers giving their students lessons online, having their students combine their music together on Skype? Or those math teachers who are drawing problems on sidewalks in chalk for their students to answer when they go out for a walk? Or the science teacher who's using school's 3D printers to protect law enforcement when they cough? Or my daughter's preschool teacher who called my little girl this morning just to talk? Or all those teachers who continue to be a rock for their students? Don't tell me that school has been canceled. School is not a building or a location. It's a collection of people who are committed to meaningful relations. And that's something that doesn't just dissipate when there's a virus that spreads across nations. Of course, it looks different, and there's plenty of resistance. But not getting together physically doesn't mean relational distance. We are being reminded right now of an educator's persistence and the vital role that they play in our society's existence. And they keep striving to provide our children with assistance. And now, when this is all over, we probably won't miss this. But right now, we focus on what's most important. So let's be loud and clear in case the media does not report it. School is not canceled.
Okay, I hope that you were able to see that all, and actually quite a bit of inspiration for me. You can find this on YouTube and I suppose at trevormuir.com as well. So somebody shared that and I thought that it would be a great way just to kind of get us back and in the mindset of things. So continue success in all that you do, and thank you for showing up today. This may be the smallest webinar that I've hosted in a while in terms of attendees. So that does give us an opportunity to be a little bit more focused on your specific situation. And let's now talk about, the objectives that I have for this particular webinar. And I'm going to ask you at the end to ensure that we were able to meet all of them. Okay, so we want to define the rubric for those of you not familiar, as well as introduce two primary types. That's objective number one. Number two, to discuss when they should be used. Number three, to understand the benefits, right? Why should we be using rubrics? And finally, number four, to apply our learning in a way that results in creating a rubric for you and your students. Now, as often is the case with a webinar, especially a 1 hour webinar, the last item, the application piece, is the hardest to do because that has to happen with some time. That requires some thought, it requires some application. So that ultimately will be your homework. And so I'm encouraging you at this point to think about what is something that you are currently doing that should have a rubric attached to it, and blocking out some time. I would say literally put on your calendar 60 to 90 minutes. By the way, it starts with more time. Over time, you get better at it. You could cut and paste, you could apply. So you'll need less time typically moving forward, but at the beginning, it will take more time. Block out the time, say, I'm gonna do this because I see the value in it, and I'm gonna create something for X, whatever that X might be for you. And of course, I have to make enough of a compelling case as to why this is important for you to actually do that and take that action. So I'm hopeful I'll be able to do that. I'm hopeful that this will be clear and actionable for you. All right, so how will I know that we were successful? If I ask you at the end to define the term rubric and identify the two primary types of rubrics, if we ask for a description between the main differences between those two and you're able to provide it, if we're able to list 3 examples of when they should be used and at least 4 benefits in using rubrics, as well as have the ability to go ahead and prepare one on the back end, if all of those are achieved, then I will know that we were successful in the time that we have together, okay? If there are any questions here, anything that you want to know about, anything I did not address in the objectives, or any of the objectives that are a little bit unclear to you, I would encourage you to please ask them. I may not respond immediately, but I will try my best to take note. And of course, the main thing here is that this be useful to you. And because of the size of our group, I think we could go ahead and try to do that. So please do ask your questions. So very simply, for those of you wondering what the word rubric is, it sounds like arugula. It's not quite the most common word and sounds a little bit strange in the English language. It comes from the Latin rubrica, which means to mark in red, which I believe has to do with how scribes or priests or some group back in the time would notate things. But it has come to reflect a measuring system as well as a guiding system. And there are 2 basic models that I'd like to share with you. One of them is called Analytic, and the other one is known as Holistic. Would anyone like to try to take a stab at what is the primary difference between an analytic rubric and a holistic rubric? Think about the words mean, think about how you might use those words in other contexts, and see if you can come up with a distinction between the analytic and the holistic And then in a moment, I'll show you examples of each and we can compare notes. I'll give it a few more moments. I know that there's a little bit of a delay perhaps in your responses, and it might just take a little bit of time for you to type in your answers, but I will continue to look for your responses as I transition the slides here. Okay, Cora, you are correct. The Analytic does have an analyze or an analysis element to it. Absolutely. Okay, we'll see how that applies to our conversation. Kelly, Analytic is a rubric used to analyze performance. It measures specifics. Yes, that is true. Specifics or maybe components, specific components, whereas holistic tends to be more big picture. Okay, so let's look at them one at a time. This is not an image of it, but simply a definition. Okay, so an analytic rubric is a scoring guide that establishes varying levels of quality for specific assignments. And it seeks to evaluate performance based on the sum of a full range of criteria rather than a single numerical score. Now, I don't know if that meant anything to you. I think we do have to define it. But basically what this means is that we look at an assignment, we break it down into its components, and we give a value to each of those components along a range. So for example, instead of me talking, why don't I show you an example, and then we can see more what this looks like. I am hopeful that you can see all of the words I can on my screen. So I'm hopeful that it's large enough for you to see on your screen. Now you'll notice here that this is not an academic rubric. This is actually a behavioral rubric. There are rubrics of all kinds. So behaviors that you want to see change could have a rubric attached to it, as well as academics that you'd like to see performed. So this could be used for a project, this could be used for a paper, this could be used for an essay, and of course, this could also be used to guide classroom behavior. Take a look at what you see here. Without getting very granular, would anyone like to comment on the example that you have in front of you? What are some of its key qualities, key characteristics? I would encourage you to think of this as a grid. So think vertical as well as horizontal as you're considering your responses. It so happens that this particular rubric does not attach numbers or levels. It uses words that we could understand is a progression. You know, if you move from left to right at the top, getting acclimated is the lowest level and community leader is the highest level. There happens to be no point system attached, but you can imagine getting acclimated maybe being a 1, learning the ropes 2, community member 3, and community leader 4. I hope that this is making some sense to you. And then as you look on the left side, you will see the gradients, you'll see the criteria. So in other words, going from top to bottom, going vertically on the left side, you've got the things you are looking for. And then as you go across, you see how they progress from poor or weak or new or developing to something more substantial and deserving of a higher grade or better or more recognition. Am I making sense so far? Can you please write yes or no, some kind of response that gives me a sense whether that was clear? If there's anything you'd like more clarification on, please go ahead and type that in. Okay, I think Cora was responding to me. What is expected, connecting it to the level of engagement. Okay, yes. So yes, you are using this to set expectations, and then you are showing what examples look like, from exemplars of poor performance to exemplars of strong performance. And the idea here is that it's very clear. It creates a vision of what we want our students to do, and it also creates an objective framework around which all assessment occurs. Because otherwise it's subjective. And if it's subjective, then people could complain, right? If you get an A on your paper and you have no idea why you got that A, then you have a legitimate gripe. I'm sorry, you're not going to complain about an A, but let's say you got a C, okay? So if you got a C in that case, then you might say, well, why did I get a C? Or why did I get a B minus? Why did I lose points at all? And sometimes the teacher's answer is not so clear. Now, for those of you, Richard commenting that he can't see it, I'm not sure why. I will provide a recording tomorrow in which you'll be able to see the actual table in front of you. But in effect, what we're looking at here, Richard, is an example of an analytic rubric about classroom behavior, where it has to do with how the student responds, the kinds of questions or the nature of the questions the student asks, as well as how the student behaves independently, okay? How a student performs without teacher oversight. Now, there's a lot more that you could put into such a rubric, right? You could talk about classroom, you could talk about general behaviors and things like that. There is some of that here. The beauty of a rubric is that every individual can go ahead and customize it to their individual needs or what they see to be most useful for their classes. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I'm going to move on to the next slide for now, and let's take a look now at a holistic rubric. Now, a definition for holistic is that it assesses performance across multiple criteria as a whole. Tell me, please, in a few words, what you think the primary difference or differences are between this one that we just looked at before and this one. And while you're considering the differences, I'm going to show you examples of a couple more holistic rubrics as well. And then you can decide which one you want to comment on, but you'll see that there are certain common characteristics that they all have. Take a look at these. Would anyone like to explain from your perspective, what is the primary difference between a holistic rubric versus an analytic rubric? Okay, so I'm not seeing any responses, and I'm not sure if that's because there's a delay or just nobody's commenting or, okay, here we go. Chaim, thank you for replying. Analytic appears more specific. Okay, well, very possibly, yes. It could be about how specific it is. I'll come back to it in just a moment, Chaim. Hassan, holistic is overall versus, I don't know what OE stands for, but specific it looks like. Holistic is including more than one skill. Okay, yes. So all of those are true, and I'd like to start with Cora and kind of work from there if I can. The holistic rubric takes multiple things together and gives it one grade. So for example, in this one on the left side, using the left column, an excellent researcher would have those 4 things: 10 to 12 sources, no apparent inaccuracies, etc. I do want to ask you in a minute what you see as the benefit of the holistic versus the benefit of the analytic. But generally speaking, the holistic can be specific, but at the same time, it's like, imagine a teacher is able to go circle one box or one score, and everything that's kind of where that student is. So looking at the one on the right, either you're a 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1. And if you're a 4, the assumption is you've got all of these things checked off. In this particular case, there are 5 items: clear writing, beginning, middle, and end, writing has feeling, etc. So the assumption is it's like a package, right? You do all of those, you get a 4. You do some of those, or you do some things on a slightly lesser scale, you get a 3, etc. Okay, as far as the benefits are concerned, you are right. Holistic would be easier, I think, to work with. Thank you, Hassan. And Kelly, to your point, holistic also allows students to become, let's see here, allow students to work toward becoming better, and can also measure mastery. I'm not sure if that's true more so with holistic, Kelly, than it is for analytic. In fact, I would say you might be able to make the opposite argument. But either one, I think, does provide the student with feedback, which fundamentally is what we're interested in. it also provides them with guidance in the first place. So as we consider the question of which one to choose, I think you have to really ask yourself, well, what am I trying to accomplish here? So if I want to break it down, let's go back now for a moment to the previous page, previous slide. Let's look at the one on the left side, right? Let's say, for example, I wanted to focus on how many sources you provided, how many inaccuracies or how accurate your document was, et cetera, et cetera. The benefit of an analytic rubric is that I can actually select from different columns based on how a student performed and then add those up together to reach a total score. And it really focuses students on individual criteria or components. Whereas if it's holistic, it tends to be more what we might say lumped together, but it's still good for a quick or global judgment. It's often good for a minor assignment, which doesn't need a lot of feedback or a lot of analysis, or perhaps you have criteria that are difficult to isolate. But if you want to break it down into detail, especially for something more involved, I would typically say go analytic, because that will give you the flexibility that you need. Another thing is you may have criteria that are of different value. So for example, you might have academic criteria as well as behavioral criteria. Maybe you're focusing as in a group project on a particular outcome, but you're going to assign some of the points to the cooperation, the collaboration, the behavior. So you might say, for example, that 80% of the grade reflects the academic piece and 20% the behavioral. I'm just making something up. You may want to use an analytic to break it down so that the student knows exactly what he or she is earning points for. Okay, I hope that that makes sense. And let's continue to look at the examples as we move forward and of course break it down further. Right, so like I talked about, product versus process. So product would be the paper, process is how did we get there? And if each one matters, but maybe not on the same level, an analytic rubric will let you break that down. Okay, when should we use them? So the simple answer is always, right? Or at least very often, because ultimately they drive good behavior and focused outcomes. So anytime assessment will be at play, specifically relating to skill acquisition, complex assignments, so, or even group behavior, like you want to do cooperative learning in your class, and you want to use an assessment to help students know what does good cooperative learning look like? How do we interact and share information? How quickly do we get into our learning spaces? How do we ask questions? How do we follow our particular roles? All of those kinds of things should be rubric driven, and distributing the rubric at the beginning is crucial, because the more I know where I want to go with something, the better my performance will be. And that is true almost always. A rubric almost serves as if you are modeling the instruction to the class. So I would certainly show your students examples of good work, right? If you want them to write a paper, show them an example of a written paper, ask them what are the good qualities of this paper, how would they critique it, this kind of thing. Get them into evaluative mode. That's going to help them a lot. But separate from that, if you can also give them the rubric at the beginning and ask them maybe where in the rubric do you see evidence of, I'm sorry, the opposite, where in the paper or where in the project or where in the, I don't know what, do you see evidence of this criteria, and what would you assess for the student? Actually going through the process of using a rubric with your students can be very empowering and very clarifying for them. Okay, if anybody does that already and wants to share that, by all means, this is all about sharing good learning practices, and don't feel hesitant to brag, because we're here to learn from each other. So if you're doing something really useful and you think others will gain and grow from it, by all means, please share that. All right, we continue. Now, why do I use it? I think we've already touched on a lot of this, but definitely worth reinforcing here, okay? Let's actually do the following. I'm curious to know, between these three, let's call the top one, the top bullet number 1, the third bullet, in other words, the second that's not indented, number 2, and then the bottom one, number 3. And what I'm going to ask you to do, please, is order them, rank them in terms of the most compelling to least compelling. So in other words, between clarifying instructions, providing students with feedback, and creating objectivity, which would you say is the most? Put that one first in your response. Which would you say is second most? Put that second. And then the last one, put it third. You could do it in a linear line from left to right. You could put them without any interruption. You could put a forward slash or a comma to separate them. To me, it makes no difference. I would love to see what you think is most important here. Okay, Cora got us started. I see, I don't want to say what they are. I want everybody to respond on your own for now. Okay, I'm not really sure why responses are delayed, Kelly. It could be an internet connection issue. Hopefully it's not something from my end, but I wish I could troubleshoot that further for you. Minimally, I hope that you could at least hear what we're talking about in real time. Okay, so I saw one response so far. Seems like everybody else went out to get coffee. I'm not sure. All right, so there's a, okay, so there is no 4. Okay, maybe I'm a little bit unclear. I wasn't so clear. The second one that says impact should not be included, that one is just sort of like a description. All right, what I do see a lot of is 1s first, some are putting 3 first, and even some 2s first. All right, so there is a range here, and the truth is there's no right answer. All of these are important. I don't think anyone would question the importance of each of these, right? If students know exactly what you want, they're going to be focused more and they will produce a better outcome. If students get feedback on what they're doing right, they'll feel better about their work, they'll feel better about how you assess them, and they will learn from it and aspire to do better the next time. And of course, objectivity is critical. Nobody wants to feel that their teacher is singling them out or doesn't like them or anything like that. And we definitely don't want to be hearing from parents accusing us of being subjective and unfair. So the more that we have objective tools, the better it's going to be for everybody. If there are any questions or comments here that you want to share, by all means, please do so. In the meantime, let's get into the details, okay? But before we do, I just find this quote to be a great quote relevant to life in general, and of course, rubrics in particular. And I'll just mention this, you want to go ahead and grab a screenshot of this or any other content that I share, that's okay. If you want, certainly I am active on social media and would love to be able to kind of engage with you there as well. So if you're attending this webinar, which I know you are, that's why you're here, and you want to go ahead and post something, post an idea, something that you learned, tag me, by all means do so. On all of the platforms, the main ones, I'm at Naftali Hoff, and specifically on Twitter at Impactful Coach. So definitely include me there in your conversations. Is there anything about this quote that you would like to comment on? Is there anything here that resonates with you in particular? So while I'm awaiting your responses, I will share with you that from my perspective, thank you, Danielle. From my perspective, there's a lot of wisdom here because oftentimes we see wasted talent, we call it, or unfulfilled potential. Success is not about how smart you are, how much potential you have. It's how you strategically utilize your skills towards your outcome. It ties into mindset. It ties into a variety of things. And I'll just give a plug to upcoming webinars. I have one tomorrow on productivity. Productivity is also a factor that ultimately factors into success. Okay, so use what you have to get what you want. Smarter is not better. Beautifully said. Let's continue. And in the process, what else does the rubrics help us accomplish? They are great tools to support learning and critical thinking and understanding, right? It helps me become a better, more thoughtful student. Am I doing this? So if a student, if the criteria is presents a compelling topic sentence, let's just say, all right? The question I ask myself now is my topic sentence sufficiently compelling? But without a rubric, I might never even think about it, let alone ask that question. So it becomes a guide for me. It helps me reflect. I can say, based on what I have here, where would I plot on this rubric? Or maybe I show it to a third party, a friend, a parent, somebody. When I say I mean the student now, and say, what do you think about my topic sentence? What do you think about the body? Do I have enough viable sources, right? You can get feedback in advance. In fact, I didn't really say this before in a clear enough way, but I'll say it now. If you have a rubric that is well designed, technically speaking, absent issues of motivation or unforeseen circumstances, every student should get an A. I hope that makes sense, because you are laying out exactly what needs to happen for students to succeed. And so long as they take you seriously, and so long as they take your process seriously, every student should be able to get an A. And what you want to be telling your students is, I expect you to get an A, and I'm telling you exactly how to do it. I'm telling you exactly how to do it. And I believe in you that you will get there. And you may even, depending on your time frame and your bandwidth and other considerations, you may want to say to them, we are going to get an A. The only question is how quickly. Will it be with the first draft that you present? Or will it be after you go ahead and you correct things and improve upon them? Because I ultimately will not accept from you anything less than an A paper. It just may take more time depending on how seriously you perform and how much effort you exert in all of this to get there. Now, isn't that like a transformative way of talking to a student? For so long, we hold all the cards and we give a grade, and how much flexibility is there already? And maybe we let them correct their test for a couple of points. But how often have we really put the locus of control into the hands of our students and allow them to be the ultimate determinants, if you will, of their own performance? So I hope that that is something that you can connect with and that you see value in, and utilize a rubric and similar tools to get your students there. Is that a fair, tell me if I'm being fair with you on this. Is it a fair statement for me to say that with a proper rubric, guidance and support and feedback, every student should be able to get an A, let's just say even on a specific project, right? I would like for you to reply, please, fair or unfair to that statement. Okay, I see some responses so far. Fair, very fair, especially for older students, yes. Okay, but you will see, Danielle, this are even relevant for younger students. So it's really true for everybody. The only question is how clear can we be with them and what kind of added support do we need? But generally with younger students, we're not necessarily doing A's anyway. It's more about, you know, where they are on a continuum. Anyway, for a different conversation, let's continue. The beauty of rubrics continued. All right, I'm trying my best to make a compelling case here, and I hope that I'm doing a good job with it. Right, they're easy to use and explain. Right, we talked previously about graphic organizers. For the visual learners in particular, I have a picture in front of me. I can see it. I see where everything fits and everything plots. So I know exactly where I am. There's no ambiguity. It's visually accessible. It's concise. It's digestible. Even when there's a lot of information, it's a lot easier to work with that than, let's say, some kind of paragraph that describes everything. It helps everybody. It helps teachers, it helps students, and it helps parents. And by the way, parents need to be helped more than ever. As a parent, thankfully, of 6 children, 5 of whom are still in formal education, and 4 of them are in elementary or high school with ongoing classes, I can tell you that the parent's role is very significant and can also be deeply taxed. And so from a teacher's perspective, we want to say, how can I help the parent help the child as much as possible? If the parent gets it, it's going to be so much easier for the student to work and get things done. Okay, and oftentimes if you do it right, slight modifications could all of a sudden create a brand new rubric with little tweaks in a whole different space, because the core concepts are the same. And especially if you give multiple projects that are all comparable in nature with minor modifications, you could be repurposing your rubric time and again. And of course, as you roll out a new one, you want to be asking for feedback and make sure that the students really understand what the rubric is asking of them. So now let's talk about making one. Now, in a perfect world, in fact, what I'm going to ask you to do, maybe even by hand, is to draft a vision of a rubric or version of a rubric looking like the one that I will show you shortly. But let's remember that there are 2 pieces to it. Number 1, there's the format and the structure, like what does it actually look like, as well as the process of making it. Let's unpack them both. So let's begin with the format or the structure. What you need are 2 things. Number 1 are a list of criteria, which is on the left side, as well as gradations of quality, that's on the top. Now you'll notice in this particular one, 4 is on the left side. In the rubric I showed you earlier, some of them had the higher score on the left. Let me quickly go back there so you could see it. Some of them had the scores on the higher scores on the left. Like for example, this research one, the higher one was on the left, and the writing one, the higher one's on the top, but those are holistic. Okay, let's go to this one. In this particular case, getting acclimated, which is the lowest score, is on the left side and the highest score is on the right side. I don't think it really matters so long as you're consistent. If you bounce back and forth, that might confuse your students. But minimally, you want to say, these are my criteria and these are the gradations of quality. So 4 would be the very best, 3 would be almost as good, 2 is less than that, and 1 is at the bottom. Now that's not clear enough, and I recognize that, so we're going to go deeper here shortly, but I just want you to see from a sort of like a big picture map framework that that's what we want. What do I really want to see in this paper? What are my criteria? It may relate to voice. It may relate to clarity or sequence or following a particular writing style or story arc or something comparable. It may factor in matters of vocabulary or grammar or spelling or some of the mechanical elements of writing, right? All of those are important, but may or may not necessarily reflect on your rubric and may not necessarily have the same value on your rubric. So if the main thing is about a story arc and you still want to make sure that spelling is correct, you may put both of there, but you may choose to tease it out in a way where spelling matters less. So I'm hopeful that this is starting to already come together as we unfold it or unpack it. Coral, I'm going to look at your comment before we continue. So yes, in a way, I think if they could show it, but sometimes it may be more implicit than explicit. Let's see, and hopefully this will answer your question. So first thing we want to know is, what am I really after? Which means to say, as I explained in the previous slide, when I grade this item, whatever it is, presentation, project, demonstration, etc., what am I looking for? What are the skills I want to see reflected? What's the content I want to see? We talked before about historical inaccuracies. We also talked about sources. We talked about a variety of different things. Some of that is content. Some of those are skills, all right? Then you also want to look at models. I've already showed you a bunch of models. You want to be looking for others. You may want to Google specific models for your discipline, for your grade, for other considerations. There are tons of rubrics out there. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. And then once you have a basic sense of what you want, develop your grid. And of course your grid, sorry, I went the wrong way here and I keep going the wrong way. Let me go back for just a moment. This is your grid or something similar to it. Okay, you've got your criteria again on the left, and now we're going to start to fill it in. Now we do the plug. And this A right here, I think can be very, very powerful because it creates a framework for us to work with. Okay, now I would ask you, but I'm also looking at the clock here, as you think about yes, yes, but, no, no. Okay, those are actually your 4, 3, 2, 1 criteria. And I hope that that makes sense. Those are your 4 levels or gradients of quality. So yes means yes to the item. So for example, did the student provide 5 appropriate or verifiable sources in his or her research? The answer is yes. Okay, yes, but. Now this example may be not perfect when it relates to the nuance of the but piece. No is very clear. No would be that they didn't. In this case, the range might just be they did 4, 3, 2, or 1, something like that. But you might want to say instead, did the student provide a clear topic sentence to initiate, the reader, engage the reader? So yes would be very clearly the student did what was asked of that student. Yes, but means that by and large, the student did the right thing, but there's an element that could have been better. No means that the student really didn't do it, but here is a positive, right? It's like sort of a saving grace. There's something in there that I can give credit for. There's something in there that does in fact meet the criteria on a basic level. And no, flat out no means nothing at all, and 0 points attributable to that. Okay, so you want to create a range using the high level first, followed by the low level. So in other words, you've got your extremes, and then you fill in the means. I hope I'm making sense here. So I start with what is the ideal, and then what is abysmal. right? What is the lowest level that will earn any points? And then once I have the high range of descriptors and the low range of descriptors clearly defined, now I can fill in the middle, whether that's 1 level or 2. So generally speaking, you're going to have 4 levels or 3 levels. If you have 4, then that middle area is going to be still a little bit harder to nuance and to tweak. That's where the yes, but, no, but piece really factors in and makes it easier to work with. If you only have 3, then in many ways it's easier yet, because you can have sort of like this in-between space where it's not quite 1, but it's at least better than that. And then, of course, students can be graded in there. All right, so you do the outside, the outside followed by the inside. So here's an example. All right, now we want to talk about summarizing the plot of the story. So the question is, did the student summarize the plot of the story? And the answer is yes, and then I get 4 points. Or let's go to number 1 for a moment. No, I didn't. So I get 1 point, or maybe 3 points for the top and 0 points at the bottom. All right, now that I have my outside ranges defined, let's take a look at what those middle areas could look like. In this case, going back to level 3, yes, I summarized the plot. So fundamentally, I did the task that I was asked to do, but, and here's where the disclaimer, caveat, deductor, if you will, of points factors in. But I also included some, sorry, there's a typo there, but I also included some unnecessary details or left out key information. So yes, I summarized it, but I didn't quite do it in the fullest sense of the term. Level 2 is fundamentally the answer is no, I didn't do it, but I do have some redeeming qualities. I did include some details from the story. Okay, I'm hopeful that this example is giving you some clarity about when you have a big item that has multiple levels. Number 1, the process to follow, as well as number 2, what could be viable examples of each level. You can respond yes if you feel that that was clear. If you have questions, you can certainly ask them. I will try my best to respond. I want to make this work for you. Okay, so let's continue to do that as we move our processes forward. Thank you for the feedback. Thank you, Cora and Danielle and Lucrece. I'm not sure if I pronounced it right. I apologize. Grace, thank you. Let us say, I see Sarah as well. Let's keep going. Okay, so we talked about, so now let's talk about our process further. Okay, now phase 2, once I have the basics in place, I want to, it's like any editing process. The same way that if I write a paper or an article, I want to have it edited to make sure that everything is clear. We need to do the same thing for a rubric, because you might have clarity in your mind about what needs to happen or what quality looks like. But if you can't articulate it, your students won't get it, your parents won't get it, and ultimately you will be disappointed with the outcome, and you'll wind up giving grades that you don't want to give, and they'll wind up getting grades they don't want to receive, and everyone's going to be pulling out their hair, virtually of course, because of the fact that you aren't being as clear as you need to be. So what are the steps that we need to be taking? Let's talk about them one at a time. Number 1, pack or unpack criteria. Sometimes you've got categories that are very broad and they need to be unpacked. They need to be broken into pieces. On the other hand, sometimes you are, you have something too, so you have to unpack the broad ones, and you need to take related or overlapping criteria and maybe bring them together. Because sometimes there's not enough clarity between one and the other, and it doesn't make sense to make them separate criteria. Each situation is different, but the idea is you want to put an analytical pen to your rubric, maybe again get feedback from students first, as well as colleagues, parents, etc., to make sure that everybody understands what is expected of the children. And then when you're done, of course, go back and revise. So here is a rubric about good rubrics. And I would definitely encourage you to take a screenshot on this one, because this is something you want to have not just in a recording, but something that you could readily refer to at a later point in time. Now you'll notice it isn't broken down on the left side with actual criteria, but you do see the gradients of quality from left to right, actually maybe from right to left, right being the weakest and the left being the strongest. but you'll notice here that they hit on different points. So the first one is about goals. Superior, the goals are clearly stated and attainable. We're talking about rubrics now. Poor would be that they're expressed either in an unclear and or unrealistic fashion. Sometimes it's just that the actual objective that you have for the students is unrealistic, and that also needs to be adjusted, right? Clearly describes attributes across a range of abilities. I'm going to stay with superior because that's really what we're after here. It judges things that are observable and measurable. It's age appropriate, and it encourages the students to grow. So there's a stretch factor there. The wording or the concepts are relevant or appropriate to the ones who are going to be using it. So if we're talking about young children, the wording is appropriate for them. If we're talking about high school students, they should be able to understand it, but it should be language also that will expand their vocabulary and their understanding. And it's stated as positive, not things to avoid, but things to do, okay? I hope that this rubric is helpful to you, because again, you can go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can go through these 6 different pieces. And if you can say yes, yes, yes to all of them, you have the makings of a superior rubric on your hands, and your students will thank you for it. Okay, a few more words about what effective rubrics look like. They're short, clear, and simple. I think if you look back, for example, at this one, you will agree this is easy to see. It's compartmentalized in a way that is clear. I know exactly what I want to find. So if I'm only interested in superior, I'm going to go straight there. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to figure out what it is. And I'm going to make sure that I check off all of those boxes. All right. They're based on curricular goals and objectives, not, fuzzy stuff that I made up that just makes me feel good. It's about what the curriculum or what the class demands. It focuses on specific learning outcomes. What will you learn? We've talked about this before. SWABOT, right? Students will be able to, we've talked about learning objectives in the past. It evaluates only measurable criteria, so nothing about feelings or things that are, like attitude, things like that. You can't measure that. But what you can do, as we've talked about, is tease out behaviors or indicators that normally would translate into, let's say, for example, a person's attitude. It may be the amount of effort that they invest. It may be their body language, something else that is measurable that then you could actually put onto a rubric. It provides, going back to our slide here, presents various ways to judge success, right? So there are a number of things that I'm looking for, and it describes attributes according to quality or frequency. Again, the clearer I am and the more that I can measure it, the better the outcome will be. And that ultimately is our goal, right? We're not here to teach, as I've said many times. We are here to facilitate learning. We are here to encourage growth. And most of that will happen when students are intrinsically motivated, desirous of the outcome that we are creating for them and putting in front of them, like, here is your goal. At any time you create a goal, whether it's you're driving on a road trip and it's 300 miles to your destination, or you're doing an exercise workout and you see the clock counting down, or some of the thing that you're working towards, any outcome that has some kind of deliverable that you can see and you can work towards is going to motivate you. Okay, so when to make one, right? When should I actually make it? Ideally, you want to do this before class, well in advance, so that you have plenty of time to tweak it, work with it, etc. But if you are not yet there and you want to use one tomorrow, I give you permission, to whatever degree that that's worth. I don't know how many administrators are here that will censor me afterwards for saying so, but I have no issue personally with cranking one out, even in the moment, and saying to students, I'm about to assign to you X. What should X include, right? What should I be looking for? And literally map it out with your students. They will be part of the process, which they will love. And of course, you will start to practice, you'll get feedback about your clarity, and you can start to use them in a real way. But definitely use it, because as we know, and you'll hear this in every webinar pretty much that I share, use it or lose it. So I say, go and use it right away. Added benefits, I'm not sure that there's anything new here. It restructures the learning environment, right? It makes the relationship between teacher and student stronger, because students really see themselves as having a role. They don't feel themselves as a victim in a unilateral relationship. It reduces anxiety, even though we're not talking about tests now, but you have anxiety relating to any project, because typically speaking, I'm not sure what the teacher wants from me, but now I'm really clear. I could basically self-assess before I hand it in. And what's more comfortable or comforting than that? It doesn't mean that the teacher won't still have a different opinion, but at least from my perspective, I know, that I've put my very best foot forward and I have a pretty good feel of what I'm going to get as a result. And it builds my confidence as well, because I'm starting to see my own growth. Right? Learning is not all about the test. It's not all about what happens on the back end. It's the ongoing learning. That's why we have portfolios and other ways that we could be measuring formative assessment, continually measuring student progress so that we're building their aptitude, their skills, and their confidence. And rubrics certainly contribute to this. Okay, just a few more samples for us to look at before we wrap it up. So let's say you want your students, I'm sorry, this one is smaller, but it was hard to kind of fit it otherwise. You want your students to write a letter to Washington. So if you'll notice the categories on the left side, you've got content accuracy, salutation, closing. This is a formal letter. So it needs a salutation, it needs a closing. It also has sentences and paragraphs in the body. You're dealing with some grammatical issues of capitalization and punctuation. Is the content accurate? And is the content neatly presented? These are all things that this particular teacher chose to be relevant. So you've got 6 categories and you have 4 levels of quality. So what would the total score be if we're not looking to multiply this number by anything else, but we're just multiplying by 1 and using for a moment as excellent being 4 and needs improvement being 1, what would be the maximum score that this student can earn by completing this assignment with excellence across the board? Would anyone like to give us a number? Corey, you got in there first. At least I saw it. 24. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Replying 24 is correct. Now, you might multiply 24 by some other number to get to, let's say, 100, or you might change the variables just a little bit to have a nice round number, but that's not so much the point. It's very clear to me how or why I got a 24 or a 12 or something else, because it's very, very clearly defined. You see the objectivity here. You see all the criteria. I know exactly what I need to do. And if I do it, there's no reason other than, something that is, whimsical or capricious, which none of us are going to do, that I wouldn't get the grade that I think I deserve. Okay, more examples over here. I mentioned before the idea of multiple considerations. For example, where I'm working individually, or working with a group, or maybe, so some of it relates to working cooperatively and staying on task. And you'll notice that I gave fewer points to those areas, whereas the larger point allocation related to the actual work, right? Where the points well researched and organized, was the platform clear and well written. So if you do that and you get both of them, so that's 18 times 2, that would be 36. And then the other 2 would be 7 times 2 would be 14. 36 plus 14, of course, is 50. So in this particular assignment, the highest score would be 50. You'll also notice that there's a range between points, and frankly, the criteria are kind of loose. It's just a Likert scale. It's a strongly agree to strongly disagree range, which is more subjective, but it's still better than nothing. If this is the best you can do for the time being, do this. Because I still know, if I'm a student, that by working cooperatively and staying on task and researching effectively and presenting it clearly, I will get a good grade. I'm still better off than if I didn't get this guidance. And I think every student would agree with you that this is better than nothing. And over time, you will get better at it and continue to work. All right, I showed you an example previously of group work. Here's another one about cooperative group work. So if you're into cooperative learning, you want to take a quick screenshot here before I pivot to the next slide. Here's another list of things: following directions, listening, sharing materials, some others. So all of these are the things I'm looking for. And then we've got the exceeds, meets, approaches, needs more work continuum, which again is not perfect, but at least it gives you a range and something to target. Okay, so as we talk about trying, which is going to happen on your time at this point, I'm going to ask you to remember what we need, which are the list of criteria, the gradients of quality. And I think it's really important that you keep those 2 considerations in mind as we work towards the end of today's presentation. First, before I forget, I'm just including those links again to the feedback. I would really, really appreciate it if you can give me up to 5 minutes of your time to complete these. Basically, they're a survey. No obligation on any of it, just as a way for me to get feedback. So I'm sharing that again with you in the link. I want you to know that there are other planned webinars. All can be accessible on my website, which is upcoming webinars related to impactful coaching. And the one specifically for this week, I've got one tomorrow on rubrics, and then I've got a special co-presenter, a woman who I know very well, a master teacher and coach. Her name is Etty Siegel. She will be joining me for a talk on managing student anxiety on Thursday. And I think that that's a very powerful topic in particular, because we know that anxiety is a huge factor, especially in general with Corona, and specifically as it relates to being an effective student, being a peer and a friend and all of that in a remote and isolated environment. So I think there's tremendous value there, and I would strongly encourage you to register for all of them. And even if you cannot make it, please do show up anyway, because ultimately you are going to be able to get the recording. Now, people ask me all the time, you're giving me all of this content for free, and that's really what I do. I'm not asking for anything in return, fundamentally, meaning to say you can show up and you'll never hear anything different from me, because I want to continue to provide this value at no charge. But if you want to be able to help me do this work, there are costs involved in what I do, of course, a lot of time involved as well. So there's a donation page that you can make a small donation to continue to support this effort. And I'm planning, by the way, to try to double, if not even more so, my list soon. And email lists are expensive and all of that, because I want more and more educators from different states and different countries to be joining, and I've got access to be able to do that. So your contribution would be appreciated. Anything that I could do for your individual school, as a workshop, coaching, consulting, a lot of the different pieces, feel free to engage with me in terms of what that could look like. And I do have a copy, a link to my book, Becoming the New Boss, which I will show you over here as well, which is, I think, an excellent book for anybody interested in leadership, either for now or in the future. You can get them on Amazon, and maybe one day when we meet in person, you'll be able to show me your copy so that I can inscribe it for you. Okay, so that's how you can support my work and my mission. And then here is my final question for you. And I'm hopeful that you can say yes to at least some of these. If the answer is yes to all of them, you could either reply by saying yes to all, or you could reply by saying yes, 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 yes. Or if it's yes, yes, no, yes, you could reply that way as well. So number one, can we define the term rubric? And I don't just mean in terms of written in red, but rubric in a more general sense of what a rubric is, and identify the two primary types. We talked about holistic, and we also talked about analytic. Can you describe the main differences between a holistic rubric and an analytic rubric? I hope that the answer to that is yes as well. Oh, by the way, I didn't include the links here. Sorry about that. I'm going to include them now so you get them. Okay. Number three, did we provide examples of when rubrics should be used, as well as 4 benefits in using rubrics? And then the last one is, did I give you enough information to prepare rubrics on your own? So if the answer is yes to all or yes to some, please reply like Cora and Kelly already have. Okay. I will also, by the way, include a link to a stress management ebook, since I talked about anxiety before. This is for you to to be able to utilize. And so I think we've covered everything here. It's so weird. I just realized now that I wasn't even speaking into my microphone as clearly as I should have, because it was off to the side. I don't think I've ever done that before. I'm just curious to know, before I hang up, was there any difference in the audio between before and now? Are you able to hear me any clearer? Because that's like weird that I did that. But that's just the life of trying to balance 1,000 things on a messy desk. Anyway, so the point is that this is where I think we are with our conversation. I want to thank you all for showing up. Thank you for being part of this as before. And I really hope that this was valuable to you. Wishing you a safe day and continued success in all that you do. Have a great day now.